great to be with you all. So wonderful to be with you all, to learn tonight and to partner. I see dear friends. I see our partners from Jewish Veg. I see all kinds of folks that we've engaged with. So wonderful to be with you all. Thank you so much, and rabbis and colleagues. Friends, when I grew up, there was a book in my bathroom. And the book in my bathroom was called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. And I came to believe that Judaism argues the opposite message. Yes, don't sweat the small stuff, focus on the big things, not the little things. But I came to believe that Judaism says everything matters. Everyone matters, everything matters. Sweat the small stuff, right? The small things matter too. And so if we've learned anything from this pandemic that we've experienced, whether it be humility that we can't plan the future, we live in uncertainty, whether it be our neshama, our souls are connected to nishima, the breath of interconnected life that we all share together, whether it be that the pandemic emerges from cruelty to animals and cruelty to one will create cruelty to all, whether it be that we have to be more gentle with each other in a world that in so many ways is so fragile and so broken. What I want to look at together is this idea that everything we do matters. What we eat matters, what we say matters, how we live matters. And so I want to chant a little something with you, if you'll join me. And it comes from the Chavot HaLevavot, who taught Me'at min ha'or, doche harbe choshech. A little bit of light dispels a lot of darkness. Which is to say, it may feel like when you hear that 70 billion land animals are killed a year, not including fish, when we hear of the enormity of this problem of factory farming, when we hear what this is doing to human health and what this is doing to the environment and what this is doing to sentient beings, the deepest cruelty, it is easy to feel powerless and helpless and cynical and mad. But those negative emotions are not going to fuel the change we want. Rather, it is the hope, it is the light, that is ultimately going to sustain our commitment to healing this world together. So I hope you'll join me in this melody. I'll put it on the side here. It goes like this. Me'at min ha'or doche harbe choshech. Friends, the teachers of Musar said the longest path in the world is the path from the head to the heart. That there's things we know, but we have to move it from knowing it to knowing it. And so I invite you into this chant as well, to think about this idea that little things matter. A little light dispels a lot of darkness. Me'at min ha'or doche harbe choshech. A little bit of light dispels the darkness. So friends, in that spirit, we're going to roll up our sleeves. We're going to open our hearts together tonight so we can see what we can do as Jewish advocates for animals, what we can do together, and how our tradition, time and time again, reminds us what it means to be a Jew and what it means to be a human. So I'm going to share my screen here. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I can make it a little bigger. There we go. Oh, no, that made it worse. Sorry. There we go. Okay. Okay, here we go. So friends, we learn here from the very beginning. Bereshit bara Elohim et Shamayim v'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Okay, simple verse. Everyone knows it. What does that mean? What does that mean? So Rashi continues here. It says Elohim, right? Why would that be it? Right? Elohim, it doesn't say God created it. This is the beginning. In the beginning, God intended to create with the attribute of strict justice. But God saw that the world could not be sustained this way, and therefore God preceded it with the attribute of compassion and joined it with the attribute of justice, as it says later on the day that Hashem Elohim made the heaven and the earth. And so, friends, we see here this idea here that we can't live in a world of truth. We can't live in a world of justice. It just can't be sustained. We are imperfect. The world is imperfect. Society is imperfect. What we need to do is be gentle with one another and live in a world of compassion. And that's why the world from the very start is built in such a way. But what does it mean? And then it says, let us create man in our image. Let us create humanity in our image. What do you mean, let us? Who is this plural? And so some say it's God and the angels. Some say it's God and the animals, that the animals are partners with God to create humanity. That ultimately we are created in that divine image and in the image of animals as well. And yet we learn from the very beginning that while we strive for justice, we yearn for justice, ultimately, compassion is the competing attribute. In the Kabbalah, there's this yin and yang, there's this balancing of competing forces, of what we want to be perfectly true, and what we need to actually ultimately sustain creation. And so Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch writes here, compassion is the feeling of empathy, which the pain of one being of itself awakens in another. And the higher and more human the beings are, the more keenly attuned are they to re-echo the note of suffering, which like a voice from heaven penetrates the hearts. Because one of the interesting things, friends, about love in Jewish thought is that it's very unromantic. Love is not an emotion, love is a deed. Yes, we value ahava as an emotion, but if that was the case, we would simply dump every relationship the moment we didn't feel an intense love for someone. Rather, love is a deed. Love is a concretized action of what it means to commit. And yet, we see this deeper level of love coming from this empathy. And empathy is under attack in America because a recent study from the University of Michigan said that over the last few decades in America, the capacity for empathy has dropped 40%. That means as a man, it's harder to know what it's like to be a woman. As a white person, what it's like to be a person of color. As a person with a body with abilities, what it's like to have a body with disabilities. As a citizen, what it's like to be undocumented. As a human, what it's like to be a non-human animal, right? It is harder and harder for people to imagine what it's like to be anything other than me. If you're straight, what it's like to be queer. If you're Christian, what it's like to be Muslim or Jewish. If you're rich, what it's like to live in poverty. It is harder and harder for people to understand what, if you're healthy, what it's like to live with sickness, right? And so that's where ritual comes in, to awaken us, to startle us, to remind us, to live with a radical empathy, a radical consciousness of otherness, the ethics of alterity, as Emmanuel Levinas famously calls it. So Rav Shugar, a postmodern Hasidic thinker of the 20th century, he writes here, we also learn from the Hasidic thought that the obligation for compassion also exists for oneself, and more specifically for one's neshama, on the divine spark that is contained within it and is currently in exile. It is upon us to reconcile with ourselves. There is no greater attribute than internal peace, than the wondrous ability to recognize and feel that I am at peace with my life, my actions, and my soul. This harmony brings about a deep peace and abundant patience. The Admor Hazaken writes, in fact, the true path of lower teshuvah has two aspects. The first is to arouse supernal compassion upon the divine soul that has fallen from its elevated state. So friends, one of the things Rav Shukar is teaching us here is that when we are complicit in oppression and in suffering and injustice, we ourselves are suffering. Our souls are suffering in a world where we are complicit in that. That is one of the tragedies of our day, where we have not figured out a way yet to have full transparency and full power and access to such a level of purity where we can actually live healthy lives. Because health is not only about the exercise and the sleep and the stress and our diet. It is also about our own interconnectivity with sickness. And we live in a sick world, a polluted world, a world of cruelty, a world of oppression, a world of containment, a world where people are ultimately confined. You know, one of the things that moved me to vegetarianism many, many years ago, before veganism, was a lecture I heard in grad school from Professor Martha Nussbaum, where she talked about the neo-Aristotelian approach of neo-capabilities approach in Aristotelian thought. And she said that anything that has an ability to be actualized, that we ourselves hold back, we've done a great wrong. That every ability should be liberated towards its actualization. And I had never even thought, I mean, it's like hard to even think back to this state of life. I never even made the connection between what I'm eating and the impact that that had upon suffering. I was like, food, what does it cost and how does it taste? I don't know how that I could be raised for 20 years of my life without even the question emerging in my heart or mind of what was involved. And that actually I had an ideology of kindness, I had an ideology of liberation, and it had somehow never been connected. And I was sick. And I was sick in that regard, in terms of what I was consuming. We are what we eat. When we are internalizing, we are actually eating a soul. The sickness of that soul being brought into our own soul is so spiritually painful. And so it says here in the Bavli, as you know, the Talmud has two different Talmuds. There's the Jerusalem Talmud, the less authoritative one, and the Babylonian Talmud. Interesting enough, written in the diaspora, is the winning one. The Babylonian Talmud is interesting because it engages more of a dialectical, argumentative process, which is nice that we've preserved that. And it says famously here, Kol hamerachim al habriot, merachmim alav min hashemayim. All who have compassion on others will receive compassion from heaven. Now, if I called that schar va'onesh, that God is kind of reward and punishing, that may sound very unattractive to us. Perhaps if I called it dharma, that would be karma, that would be more attractive to people. If I called it the kind of the spiritual balancing of the universe, that might be more attractive. Nonetheless, there is this idea here that actually when we breathe out compassion more deeply, we start to receive compassion more deeply. That these things come our way. And I believe this. I truly believe this. This was part of my own kind of spiritual process of really thinking about the gates of heaven question that keeps me up at night. Did I give more or did I take more from the world? And it is very hard as a white male American in the 21st century who's upper middle class, who has citizenship and a body with abilities and is straight, to in any way claim that I've given anywhere near what I've taken. I mean, my first 3 years, I wore diapers. And then I sat in classrooms for like 2 decades of my life. And then I continued to just have benefit after benefit. How could I ever pay back? How could I ever pay back that debt? And so we see that like this sense of debt that emerges with every breath we ultimately take. How can I pay that back? And with each bite that we take in our lives, how can that be also a commitment towards that spiritual actualization of the oneness of all reality? It says in the Bereshit Rabbah here, there is nothing superfluous in the universe. Even flies, gnats, and mosquitoes are part of creation, and as such serve a divinely appointed purpose. Now, I am so far from perfect as it comes to bugs, but I remember a moment when we bought a bug vacuum, and we said, you know what? Like, okay, there are some bugs that you could buy this on Amazon for like $19 or wherever you buy things. A little vacuum where like there's a bug in your house and you can catch it in this vacuum and release it safely outside. And there is something to understanding that on the level of reincarnation, if you, like me, are engaged in the Kabbalistic idea of reincarnation, it means that I care about the future of climate change because that's me also. It's a self-interest. I'm going to be here also. It's not just that I love my grandchildren, because that argument is not working to get people to care. It's that I myself will experience the detrimental consequences. So too, I was a man and I was a woman and I was black and I was white and I was a frog and I was a cow and I will be, right? That bug, I have compassion for that bug because ultimately the self and the other falls away. We are one. We are one in the mystical sense of the universe, of all life sharing the same breath and sharing access to this same planet that we are all visitors upon. All of us with the hidden light of the divine within us, waiting to be revealed and liberated. It says in Midrash Tanchuma here, if a person traveling by ship encounters a great storm, they will throw their possessions and livestock overboard in order to save the passengers. They do not have the same degree of compassion for their animals and possessions as they do for other human beings. However, the Holy One, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, has compassion for animals, just as God has compassion for humans. As it states, God's mercy is upon all works. So friends, That says it is only natural for us as human beings to have a hierarchy of obligations. I'm most obligated to myself, and then to my family, and then my community, and then my neighborhood, and then my country, and then global humanity, and then animals, and then the planet. We might have some neat hierarchy like this that may feel like it works for us, either prescriptively or descriptively, that we live by. And yet God lives in an egalitarian ethos where anything that has a beating heart, anything that is a part of this, of the sacred nature of creation itself, is worth fighting for, is worth ultimately defending and liberating. We continue here in Midrash Tanchuma. Rabbi Levi said, for 12 months, Noach and his sons did not sleep, for they were compelled to feed animals, beasts, and birds. Rabbi Akiva said, even branches for elephants and glass shards for ostriches, they brought aboard by hand in order to feed them. Some animals eat at 2 o'clock at night, while others eat at 3. Thus you may deduce that they never slept. And so we see that Noach was not some perfect human being, nor was his family, but they were worth building a world upon. And why were they worth building a world through? Because of their ability to actually see this reality. And it is so hard to live consistently with this truth. And so what I think is central to the Jewish ethos is making the invisible seen, not living on the surface reality, but making the unheard cries heard, making the unseen tears seen, ultimately taking that which is hidden from certain lives and making it seen and making it heard, and doing it in a way that can be digested and fully experienced. It says here along this similar theme, this is one of the more famous Talmudic passages, that a calf was being taken to slaughter. When it ran away, it hid its head under Rav Yehuda, the prince's robes, and it cried. It cried. And you've heard the callous argument from others before. Oh, the crying doesn't mean it suffers. The crying is just some neurological response or something. When the fish is in fear, that doesn't mean it's suffering. Wait a minute. I've never understood such an argument, that a basic level of compassion tells us what crying means. He said, go, for this you were created. One of our greatest rabbis of our tradition said, go, for this you were created. I have an anthropocentric theology. And it says that humans are the pinnacle of all creation, and you are here for my exploitation. You are here for my pleasure. They said, the angel said, since he has no pity, let us bring suffering upon him. One day, Rabbi's maidservant was sweeping the house, saw some of these young weasels lying there, and made to sweep them away. He said to her, let them be. It is written, and his mercy is over all the works. They said, since he is compassionate, let us be compassionate to him. And we see here this learning process that can emerge for us. This learning process that can happen for even the greatest individuals who are righteous on so many fronts, and yet their hearts haven't been open to this as well. And here we can embrace an ethic of non-judgmentalism, in that all of us have our blind spots. All of us have our own ability to grow and see more deeply. And so that is one of the great spiritual opportunities for vegetarians and for vegans, that when we protest out in a world that isn't compassionate, we challenge ourselves, where am I not living compassionately in my own life? When we protest a world of corruption and lies and injustice, we ask ourselves, where am I also not living by that? The Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Chassidut, said, for everything we protest, we have to do even more to uproot that vice within ourselves. And that's the spiritual opportunity of animal advocacy, of veganism, for us to say, oh, I don't check the box, vegan, done. Like, I've done it, now I got to bring everyone else on board. Yes, we have to bring everyone else on board, but our work is just beginning. Our work is just beginning to extend that level of compassion on the next level. And so just our last two sources here before I'll share some thoughts and we'll move to conversation as well. It says in Eruvin, the point here is that we not only are here to help the non-human animals, we're also to learn from them. It says in the Talmudic tractate of Eruvin, if we had not received the Torah, we would have learned modesty from watching a cat, honesty from the ant, and fidelity from the dove, which is partially humorous, but also partially telling us that we have a lot to learn. We have a lot to learn. One of the things we have to learn is that we are the most destructive beings on the planet. Animals kill animals when they need to eat. They don't kill animals for profit. And we are committing mass atrocities for the sake of profit, for the sake of GDP, for the sake of growth, for the sake of dominance. When we say, when will the lion lie down with the lamb? What we're ultimately asking is, when will we as human beings lie down? We are the ones that are the threat, that we are waiting to lie down, who are conducting warfare. It says in Tales of Hasidim, after the Maggid of Mezrich's death, his disciples came together and talked about the things he had done. And when it was Rabbi Shneur Zalman's turn, he asked them, do you know why your master went to the pond every day at dawn and stayed there for a while before coming home again? They did not know why. And Rav Zalman continued, he was learning the song with which the frogs praise God. It takes a very long time to learn that song. It reminds me of another Torah relevant to Pesach, which is coming up very soon, which says that when the Israelites went through Kriyat Yamsuf, they crossed through the sea and they got to the other side and they saw the Egyptians drown. They went to sing to celebrate their liberation and their survival, but they forgot how to sing. Because slaves don't know how to sing. They're not allowed to sing. They forgot how to sing and they looked up in the sky and they heard the birds chirping. And they learned how to sing from the birds. That in fact, the song of freedom that we can learn can ultimately be learned in so many directions. And if you, like me, were raised to watch the movie The 10 Commandments every 2 months, or maybe you made your kid do that, you probably remember Charleston Heston, the great leader of the NRA, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses himself, who, when he raises his staff up, you can see his Rolex watch popping out of his Moshe garb over there. If you pause it, next time you watch the movie, you'll see his Rolex popped out. But in those days, you couldn't Photoshop and you couldn't redo the scene because thousands of people were walking through the sea. So you'll see it next time. But that movie gives a false portrayal. It shows one pathway through the water that people walked. But the Midrash says there were 12 pathways through the water. And there were chomot v'chomot. There were walls and walls of water between them. And there were chalonot v'chalonot. There were windows and windows between those walls of water. Which is to say, friends, that each of us has to walk through our own pathway of liberation. But we need windows to see each other's pathways as well. And so that can create a radical pluralism, a religious pluralism, an epistemic pluralism, potentially even a political and moral pluralism. And yet, even within that, there's only 12 pathways. There are also moral absolutes of what it means to live halachta b'drachav, imitatio Dei, emulating this ultimate divine trait of compassion. And so my wife and I went vegan almost 11 years ago on our wedding day, because we said, we need partnership. We can't do this alone. We need community. Shamayim is built on this idea. The broader Jewish vegan movement of Jewish veg and of Jiffa and of Shamayim and of all of our friends around the world and of other faiths who are doing this, of the larger vegan movement, a movement which is not a diet movement. Veganism is not a diet. It is an ethic of nonviolence. It is a movement towards restraining violence and confinement ultimately in the world. Yes, there's a diet component to it. And I'm not pushing back on those who chose it primarily or solely because of the health dimension. But it is something much larger. It is not a political revolution, but a spiritual revolution against the complacency, against the indifference. And so ultimately, we need each other. We need to strengthen each other as families, as communities. That's our synagogue vegan challenge, to build this through communities. We need to strengthen each other on campus. That's our college fellowship. We need to strengthen each other. That's why we do our retreats, where we can come together and sing and learn and celebrate. And we need to strengthen each other on learning programs like this, where we can come together and learn and share and feel the fire for why we're ultimately doing this work. So friends, I have a lot more to say, but I want to pause because I don't just want to talk at, I want to talk with. And I would love to open the conversation about things that you're thinking about as it relates to some of these questions. And feel free to agree with things I shared. Feel free, of course, to disagree and be in machloket. And I would love, my friend Rabbi Jonathan Bernhardt is gonna facilitate this opportunity.
Right. So first, Yesher Koach, Shmuly, thank you so much for sharing those wonderful words. Really appreciate the combination of the knowledge and the passion that you bring is really it's just amazing and wonderful, and the vision and what you choose to focus that knowledge and passion on is amazing. Really so deeply appreciate it. So here's how we're going to do this, which is we're going to, because Shmuly said he'll take some people who raise their hands. So I'm like, okay. So if people want to raise their hand, Shmuly, and you want to call on them, you can call on whoever you want to call on. If someone wants to send me a question, they can send it privately to me, and I will, should there be a pause, I will ask the question. And if we don't get to all of them, I already know that Shmuly is going to be more than glad to share them through our newsletter at some point in time that we will be sharing with other people. So we will get all of them answered ultimately. So with that having been said, we're opening it up. So Shmuly, if anyone wishes to.
Great. Good. I see Sammy Magid. Sammy, it'd be great to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Hey, Rav Shmuly, nice hearing from you too. Always love hearing some Torah. I'm curious, your shir was kind of talking a little bit of the path towards plant-based by, the compassion and the ethical mindset. I'm curious if you think that that's like the only option or the only route, or if it should be a combination, for instance, like the commercial mindset of, a lot of innovation in, lab grown, for instance, meats or cheeses or dairy products. The de jure option of outlawing or banning either certain methods of housing or killing animals versus possibly, making certain things illegal. And then also the halachic route. So for instance, the Rav famously banned fagua. And there's also other options, but, I'm curious as to, if there's a specific option that you think is the best thing or the fastest way to do that, especially knowing that, the compassionate route, while theoretically that might be the ideal route, because you're convincing someone to go on a more ethical and moral high ground. It generally also takes a lot longer, which means more animals have to suffer in the time that takes.
Sammy, that is such a great question. Thank you so much for that. And I have a number of reflections. I could talk about that for about another hour, but I'll give a brief response to bring more voices in the room. Many of you may have heard that the greatest leader in the Haredi world, the greatest leader in the ultra-Orthodox world, died a few days ago. His name was Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky. And for Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, if he gave a ruling, like 1 million people would follow his ruling. Hundreds of thousands of people would just be like, Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky said this, so I'm going to do what he says. That might be your type of Judaism, that you have a relationship to a rabbi like that, but I'm guessing for most of you it's not. But I wish I could say, halachically, right, we are in a new era where, yes, it's true in the Garden of Eden it was vegan, and yes, it's true then we moved to an era where you could only eat meat based on korbanot, on animal sacrifice, and then we moved to one where you could only do it within this temple model, and then we moved to one where it was very limited and rare, where one could eat meat. And now we are in a new era of capitalism and of factory farming, where that permission to eat meat has expired. And I would argue halachically, it is forbidden by Jewish law to consume animal products, given the level of torture that is involved today. And that does not erase the history when it was permitted. It means we live in a new era, a fifth era. And I wish I had the power to give that argument. I also wish I had the brilliance to be an entrepreneur who could develop the lab-grown options and knew how to market such options to further that, because I do believe Judaism is not ascetic and that people should really enjoy their food, whatever they're going to enjoy. And for some people, not me, but for other people, they want their food to take as close to the meat option as it was. I want the Impossible Pork to be just like pork. Or I want to eat shrimp that's not shrimp, right? Or right, people who they miss that taste. And I don't blame them. I think that's great. If you're going to eat a vegan option that tastes like something you love, I think that's great. Like for me, it sounds gross. I'm just so grossed out by pork and shrimp and those things that I have no interest. But I don't blame people who want that. And so I think that the halakhic approach is great for people who have followers that will follow them. The entrepreneurial approach is great for people who have that brilliance. The legislative approach is wonderful for people who are advocates who can create systemic change. And I believe one of the reasons I went into to become a rabbi and to be a spiritual leader is because I believe that in the breakdown of community in America and worldwide, that religion is one of our last hopes for community. Community has been broken down. Now, religion has tons of faults and tons of problems, but religious communities are alive and well. And whether or not we choose to be a part of one, I believe that we have to do our part. And I think that the pathway, the ultimate pathway, Jewishly, to get there, yes, it embraces the entrepreneurial approach. Yes, it embraces the legislative approach. Yes, it embraces the religious legal approach. But ultimately, I think it's about the spiritual tools that lead us towards a place of enlightenment, that lead us towards a place of teshuvah and personal growth, that leads us towards a place of interconnectivity. And I think that that's one of the unique things that we can do as Jews. Now, I don't want to be naive to suggest that's the only path. We need all of these paths. Once again, that's the 12 pathways through the sea to get to the other side of being free. And so I believe we need all those paths. And so I hope that's a little bit of a short answer to your awesome question, Sammy.
Thank you.
Okay, feel free to unmute yourself if you want to jump in. Oh, or Jonathan.
Well, so as people are getting ready to ask another question, someone raised their hand, I'm just going to throw out there one of the questions that I got sent to me that I'm just going to reflect back. So one of the questions, you know, at Shamayim, our focus is animal welfare, and we sort of build out from there. But one of the questions that does come up in a number of times when I'm speaking with people, and I'm sure that you have it as well, is how we address the suffering of farm workers who harvest our food. So I was just wondering if you could take a moment to kind of reflect upon how you integrate that understanding and that suffering in as well.
Okay, amazing, amazing. So I want to keep on partially, but partially take off my worker rights hat because that is something I care a lot about. And first suggest that, like, I do believe not in the way that some suggest, but in a way that is meaningful to me, I do really believe in intersectionality in the sense that these issues are very much interconnected. And that when we are fighting for animals, we are fighting for workers and we are fighting for the land and beyond. That has to be a part of our consciousness. When I make a bracha, I think a bracha is the best spiritual tool from our tradition. Because prayer, you pray in the morning and it's done. You pray at night, it's done. The bracha, the Talmud says, make it 100 times. 100 times, make sure you bring your spiritual consciousness throughout your day, right? Throughout your day. And every time you take a bite of food, the bracha is a way of saying, I affirm what I am eating is a part of my deepest, most cherished, holy and moral commitments, right? And I wish for this food to elevate me, and I wish to elevate this food through the energy that I use from it. And so I think we should think about the animal and the worker and the land and all of that in that expanded consciousness of the bracha. And so of course it's interconnected. But I do reject the argument ultimately that by us shutting down factory farms, which we are years too late in doing already, that we're putting people out of work and we are opposed to worker justice by combating factory farming because we're putting people out of jobs. Just like I would reject the notion that we shouldn't further, more green technologies because we're putting people in the automotive industry out of work. There's a lot to unpack there. But ultimately, we live in a world that prioritizes humans over non-human animals, and I understand why. And in many ways, I myself would as well. I prioritize my family over strangers, and I prioritize my family and my friends over cows that I don't know. I mean, that ought to seem obvious to us. And yet, there's a counter truth. And the counter truth is that the greatest suffering in the world today is happening in the non-human animal kingdom, quantitatively and qualitatively. Quantitatively, the numbers that are killed and suffering, and qualitatively, the extent of the torture and cruelty involved. And so it's a great tikkun. It's a great tikkun. The Rambam says, Maimonides says, we should go to a certain extreme in order to bring us back to a moderation. We need to go to an extreme to place animals back on the hierarchy in order to bring us back to a place ultimately of balance. And so, like every cause, with every good we do, there's a harm that's also caused, and we can't be naive towards that. But I ultimately believe these issues are deeply interconnected.
Thank you very much. So I have some more questions coming to me, but we also want to just let people have the opportunity just to raise their hands. So I'm going to let that happen, and Shmuly, for you to call on whoever you wish to call on.
Great.
All right, should I go ahead?
Great.
Okay, so another question though that we got that came from a very different kind of place. So one question there, the one that just answered, was very practical in terms of, how do we understand animal welfare, and by extension, the welfare of human beings who are involved in this process. But this other question comes from a very different place. And it begins, it's a more theological kind of perspective, which is, we understand that after the time of Noah, God gave permission for people to eat meat. Okay, but some people have heard that and are, well, what's the correlation there? Like, why was that permission given? So that's one question. The other question is, some people have heard that, yeah, permission to eat meat, but only on Shabbos. Right. So I was wondering if you could address sort of both the sort of the theological question, but also sort of the minhag, the practical.
Great.
This is what people question as well.
Love it. Love it. Awesome. So the main argument given as to why the permission for meat to eat meat is given after the flood is that a divine concession towards the weak nature of the human being. That the human being is fundamentally violent, and the human being needs an outlet for that violence. And better that outlet be on an animal than on a human being. That they suggest over there that humans are bloodthirsty. We are full of rage and full of such desires, and better than killing a human being, which is why the flood happened, because of murder and stealing and corruption. Better that we take out that bloodthirst upon these animals. I'm thoroughly unconvinced. It's been a while since anyone would call me a psychologist, but my understanding of some empirical studies suggest that the more we express an emotion or a certain deed actually deepens the commitment to it rather than releases it. Right? Remember when people say, "Oh, have a good cry." Well, a good cry for some might actually remove that sadness, but for others it might deepen it. Or remember the idea that you should go punch a pillow or hit a tree, right? For some that might release rage, and for others it might actually double down on it, right? It'd be like saying, "Go lie to remove your desire to lie." Well, is that how lying works exactly? Or do you habituate yourself towards certain patterns? So it's not clear to me that taking out your violent nature upon something actually releases that need, as opposed to kind of deepening it. Nonetheless, that was kind of the understanding over there. And to that second point on Shabbos, I do want to say, if I was going to give the best justification religiously for eating animals, it would be the one that emerges from Chassidut and from earlier Kabbalah, which sounds like this. Now, I'm not convinced by it, but I think it's the best one that does exist, which is that animals have souls like us. And when we consume that soul, we are able to elevate that soul by doing good deeds with that energy that we've consumed. Now, geez, if someone was going to eat limited amounts of meat and going to have that kavanah, that intentionality, when they did it of like, I love this animal and I am going to treat it well and kill it as compassionately as I can in order to ultimately elevate it, that would be a big step of progress. Now, I'm not at all convinced that killing anyone is any form of progress, or killing anyone would actually be in service of them. Nonetheless, if you live in the world of souls as opposed to just the world of bodies, which I can understand spiritually, and you're more concerned of the soul of the cow than you are of the body of the cow, I think that's a pretty decent argument if someone really lived with that spiritual intentionality. So too, if someone said like Shabbos is an elevated state for me, and I'm not going to eat the other days because the other days, I'm gonna resist. But on this one day, I'm gonna live in that world of souls. Like I can understand that point. There's a movement is too strong, but there's an idea out there called mushi, which is meat only on Shabbat and Yontif. And I do think that's progress. I do think that we need a lot more vegans, but I think we also need a lot more vegetarians, and we need a lot more of animal welfareists, and we need a lot more of reductionists. Everyone making steps forward is ultimately going to make a big difference, because we're about to be in a train wreck. We're about to be in a train wreck, and if we don't slow down that train wreck, through every way possible, it's a very scary time. So now I see a question on the side here about when the Beit HaMikdash arrives and offerings. And let me say there that if it was to be that a Messiah came, and if it was to be that a third temple was to be built, and if it was to be clear from like a divine voice that like we are going to return to a world of korbanot and animal sacrifices to serve God, I am going to be in line. I'm going to be in line. And it says you only have to eat a kazayit, which is like such a tiny amount, right? You have your korban pesach. Thankfully, I don't believe that to be true. I don't believe that that's ultimately what we are to return to. And even if we were, yes, it is a very fringe view, but Rav Kook does have his famous Torah that says the only korbanot we will return to in the Beit HaMikdash is the mincha offering, the flour offering, not ones of animals. And he points specifically, and he was an only meat on Shabbos kind of guy, and so he understood that in his view, he said we're too flawed in our day, and so people need to eat this stuff. But as we move towards the Messianic era, we're going to get closer and closer to that ultimate reality. And so I do believe in the texts that say the Messianic era is ultimately about a nonviolent era.
Mm-hmm. All right, appreciate that very much. Now this might end up being our last question, but we'll see. But if anyone else has any other questions, obviously please.
I could go a little after 5 or 10 minutes if that's okay. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll see how we do here. But if people are looking to learn more and expand people's knowledge of Torah and its connection to veganism and the environmentalist movement, the question is actually addressed to both of us. Kind of, what would we recommend? Right. So I'm going to do you the favor of recommending your book. Right. So that's just the first thing. If people are looking for an amazing way of doing it, right, the book that Rabbi Yanklowitz wrote on being a Jewish vegan is an amazing way of being approaching it. Gives a lot of different kinds of perspectives and so forth. So that is one very solid way. And I'm also going to mention there might be a class or two that I'm teaching on Monday, for example, at 9:30 for half an hour where you can also learn. So now that we've gotten our self-promotion out of the way, Rabbi Yanklowitz, what else would you put out there in terms of things for people to kind of look at and people to explore on this topic?
Amazing. I love it so much. Thank you so much. So, wow, where to begin? Yes, and I would definitely second Reb Jonathan's classes and hope that you'll join us at our retreat next year where we can do it together, and many learning opportunities between now and then, which we're very excited about, and resources from so many of our partners, whether it's Jewish Veg or Jiffa, or there's a fellow now on Facebook, Vegan Rabbi, who's posting a lot. There's so many. Our friend Mayim Bialik, a founder of Shamayim, who is quite active in this. In addition to the Jewish Vegan, which I edited, I also co-edited a book with Jacob Lebenz, a professor, which is worth looking at. Of course, Richard Schwartz books, which he's been writing about for decades around these issues. But in addition to the Jewish sources, because at some point we will exhaust the Jewish sources around these fronts, I really do believe that the next stage is the spiritual work, of looking animals in the eyes and encountering them and engaging with them, and allowing their eyes to penetrate our souls. Primo Levi wrote that in Auschwitz, that there was no one among the Nazis who looked him in the eye. And then a dog came over and looked at him, and he said the dog was the last Kantian in Germany, the last one who actually saw him. And Buber writes about the dialectical and dialogical encounters he has with horses and with cats in Jerusalem, that our ability to kind of transcend self in many ways can happen most deeply in those encounters. And I've noticed this with children. Sometimes children can cultivate empathy for a dog before they can for their brother or sister. And so that's an amazing thing for us to have these holy encounters, with these wonderful creatures. And I do think that the spiritual work that's involved also in experiencing our own mortality, in experiencing our own frailty, in experiencing, if you've been with people in hospice, if you've been with people who are end of life, experiencing the frailty of human life, and in that humility, being able to see ultimately how similar we are to all that live and all that die, and how much we want to be on the side of support and love with them. And so lots of Jewish resources, but I think that's the deepest one there, ultimately, of reconnecting with our breath, and from that gratitude, the responsibility that emerges.
Right. And just along those lines, in terms of that spiritual movement, Rabbi Yanklowitz, I wonder, Art Green's work, particularly his later stuff, really has a deep focus on Judaism and coming from a place of creation. A lot of the Jewish narrative tends to focus on Yetziat Mitzrayim, on the Exodus, as its primary theological point. Rabbi Professor Art Green does it from creation, and I think has a real tie into and sensitivity to just those things that you were speaking about so beautifully. So
thank you. So thank you so much for that. And he's one of the greatest neo-Hasidic thinkers of our time. And he writes on the Parsha last week that we bring the Chatat and the Ola together. We bring our spiritual actualization offering alongside our shadow side. And friends, here I think is how we sustain this movement. The way we sustain this movement is by holding the dark and the light together. Many people want to be in one side. They want to only hold the light. They say, oh, everything is positive, everything is good. Don't focus on the negative, be joyful, be positive. Everything is optimistic and good, and everything is going to work out, right? That is wrong. The world is broken. There's pain and suffering, and we can't look away from it. And there's other people who want to live in the darkness. Oh, it's terrible, and as bad as you think it is, it's 10 times worse. We should be depressed and hopeless and cynical. Nothing is going to work. We are in a broken world that is doomed. And I think that is the quintessential non-Jewish approach. And if you want to be the most respected activist, you make it may sound worse than the other person sound. You think it's bad, it's even worse than you thought, right? And so, friends, I think the authentic approach is to hold the dark and the light together. That we need to hold that brokenness, and only to the extent that we can hold the light and the hope and the optimism alongside of it can we sustain that. And so we bring the Chatat and the Ola together. As our service ultimately, Art Green teaches, in order that we can ultimately sustain both of those commitments, both the hope and the reality.
Yeshikach. I have one other question that someone sent to me, but before I do so, I just want to see if there's anyone out there who has a hand raised. Rabbi Yanklowitz, do you see anybody? Do we feel like picking on anybody?
Let's see if anyone wants to unmute.
Okay, so if not, then our last question for this evening. So question was raised is have you read Food is Climate by Glenn Mercer? And if I get the implication of the question incorrect, the person who asked this, Karen Haber, can chime on in. But I think it's an important point for us to kind of explore, is that connection between food and climate, and how familiar we are with this kind of connection, and how we then also use this connection to explain where we're coming from. So is that a work that you're familiar with, Glenn Mercer?
I have not read that work. I have thoughts on the idea, but I would, without reading that book, I can't comment specifically on that. I don't know if you have, or if you want to comment on it, or.
Got me. So I will circle around to Karen and get a little bit more information about that. But I'm wondering, just as we conclude, if you could talk a little bit about the connection between food and climate, because I think for many people, at least in terms of the work that I've been seeing that we've been doing at Shamayim and with the Synagogue Vegan Challenge and hearing from people, that connection is so powerful for people, and yet so many people don't really appreciate or understand it.
Great. So there's the empirical side here, and there's the spiritual side here. Thanks, Karen. Oh, Karen, did you want to jump in? I see you unmuted yourself.
I just did it just in case you asked me a question.
Oh, okay. Well, do you want to share any more of your thinking here? Or
well, this is a new book called Food is Climate by this really funny Jewish guy named Glenn Mercer, who is a passionate, ethical vegan who puts together the whole argument how, and this is true, it's very scientific, and it's only 59 pages, this part of it, of how commercial animal agriculture on land and sea is 89% of climate disaster. And that if we can stop farming animals like all over, especially like in the Amazon, and let the rainforest grow back, and stop dragging nets through the ocean, which just the displacement of the sediment alone gives out more carbon dioxide onto the earth than airplanes and kills all that plankton. If we can just stop those two things, the ocean will return, the earth will return, and we can still get into an airplane and visit our family or drive our cars. Not to say we shouldn't work more on alternative energy from fossil fuels, but fossil fuel is not the monster that Al Gore and everybody in the old climate model spoke about. This is the new climate model, the new scientific climate model, and it's all driven by murder and suffering.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Oh, are you on mute still? Yeah. You want to unmute?
I'm just going to mute Karen and just Rabbi Yanklowitz to give you time to answer, so you can also then make the exit that I know you need to make. And thank you very much for the time that you've given us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So my friend who also lives here in Scottsdale, Arizona, you should come visit us, is Silas Rao, who you may have heard of because Silas Rao leads Climate Healers, and he's the producer of many documentaries you've seen, like Cowspiracy and many others. And as you know, one of the premises there is exactly as Karen shared over there, about how even major segments of the environmental movement, because of funding, sought to dupe us around the ultimate priorities. And I think that's right. And I think that that this is a crucial, this is the most crucial part about being an environmentalist. And so it's all the more disturbing when we go to social justice conferences or environmental conferences and we see the food choices are not in sync with such commitments. And in the world of gematria, the world of numerology, which I don't spend so much time in, but it was pointed out that Teva, nature, has the same gematria as Elohim, as God. That ultimately our sense of oneness of all reality is connected with this earth. That we are not a religion that says we want to bring bring earth up to heaven. We want to bring heaven down to earth. We are committed to this world, to repairing this world. That divinity is not found up in the sky, but down here in the earth. That the wholeness of God, the wholeness of humanity, the wholeness of oneness is ultimately about the health of this land. And what we eat goes back into our bodies and back into the land, and the land goes back into us. And if we've ever been to a levaya, a funeral, we know this truth when we see the body that's ultimately lowered into that earth. But it's not only at the moment of death, it's in that moment of life. Because ultimately we die 5 times. The first time we die is when we stop living based on our truest values. The second time we die is when our body dies, the cessation of heartbeat or the death of the brainstem. The third time we die is that time that our body is lowered into the earth. Our fourth death is the last time someone ever utters our name in this world. And the fifth time of death is, our fifth death is that whatever impact we had in this world dissipates as if we had never even existed at all, right? And for some, this reality will move them towards materialism. If I just buy more stuff, I'm really here. Or if I put my name on things, then I'll really be here, right? If I just consume more, if I really experience the earth in a hedonistic way, then I'll really be here. But I think this deeper spiritual response is worth thinking about, that actually it's the impermanence, the responsive impermanence that can ultimately emerge, to see that we actually are like a wave that disappears in the ocean only to once again return, that we are ultimately a part of this total wholeness. And so this connection between food and climate is the same as this connection between our soul and the animal soul, is the same as the connection between humanity and divinity, is the same as this connection between the fact that we are Adam, we are people, come from Adama. As people, we come from earth. and the air and the earth and the soul are ultimately all connected. I wish everyone so much bracha. I hope you'll give it back to me for a meaningful rest of Adar, a meaningful Pesach, and a Pesach that Pesach doesn't work if we just sing nice melodies and if we have nice food and we read the Haggadah. Pesach works when it's an anti-oppression movement. When we leave the Seder, we have moved the world towards this commitment of liberation ultimately. May we all do that together and not only achieve it, but achieve joy in the process of that justice work. Thank you, Reb Jonathan, for hosting this and for all of you for joining.
Yeshakach. Thank you so much. Really, Rabbi Yanklowitz, so appreciate your words. And as I said before, your passion as well is just inspiring. I want to thank all of you for joining us. We will be sending out an email just to give people a link to the recording, and as well as just different ways in which everyone can help support the different programming that we're doing. There's a number of different ways that people can help us out. We hope you'll be able to join us in all those ways. And we look forward to seeing everyone next week at 5 o'clock for our speaker, John Oberg, who's going to be talking about how to take all of this passion, how to take this enthusiasm, and how to be able to communicate it in a way that people can hear so that our message is not only true, but it's actually heard and it's effective. Thank you all again for joining us. Laila Tov, everyone. And thank you again, Rabbi, for just a wonderful, wonderful talk. Thank you so much for your words.